By 1943, the war that Nazi Germany had once dominated was turning decisively against it. Only a year earlier, German armies had stretched deep into Soviet territory and still occupied most of Western Europe. But the devastating defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943 shattered the image of German invincibility. An entire field army had been surrounded and destroyed. The psychological shock was enormous, not only for the soldiers at the front, but also for civilians back home. Across Europe, resistance movements gained confidence. Among Germany's allies, doubts quietly grew. The myth of unstoppable blitzkrieg had been broken. Instead of advancing on multiple fronts, Germany was now reacting to powerful enemy offensives. Supplies were strained, manpower losses were mounting, and the Red Army was growing stronger with each passing month. What had once been a war of expansion was becoming a desperate struggle to prevent collapse. The year 1943 would not be remembered for German victories. It would mark the moment when the balance of power shifted permanently. From this point forward, Germany would fight largely on the defensive, attempting to hold territory rather than conquer it. The war had entered a new phase, one defined not by ambition, but by survival. In February 1943, shortly after the catastrophe at Stalingrad, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels delivered one of the most dramatic speeches of the war at the Berlin Sportpalast. Addressing a carefully selected and enthusiastic audience, he called for total war. His message was direct and urgent. Germany must mobilize every available resource, every factory, and every citizen for the struggle ahead. Civilian luxuries would be cut. Cultural events were reduced. Industries unrelated to the war effort were reorganized or shut down. Women were increasingly drawn into factory work to replace men sent to the front. Longer working hours became normal. The speech was designed to inspire determination, but it also revealed the seriousness of Germany's situation. The regime now acknowledged that partial mobilization was no longer enough. The war required complete national commitment. Behind the dramatic rhetoric lay a harsh reality. Germany was losing strategic momentum. Total war was not declared from a position of strength. It was declared out of necessity. The government sought to transform fear into fanatic resolve, urging the population to endure sacrifice and hardship. The speech symbolized a turning point in German society, as the entire nation was pushed into an intensified and exhausting war effort that would test its limits. During the summer of 1943, Germany attempted to regain initiative on the Eastern Front through a massive offensive near the city of Kursk. Known as Operation Citadel, the attack aimed to encircle and destroy Soviet forces in a large salient. It would become one of the largest tank battles in history. German commanders concentrated elite armored divisions, hoping to repeat earlier successes. However, the Soviets had anticipated the attack. They constructed deep defensive belts filled with mines, anti-tank guns, trenches, and fortified positions. When the German assault began in July, it met fierce resistance. Tanks clashed across vast fields in brutal close-range combat. Despite tactical skill and advanced equipment, German forces could not break through decisively. Soviet reserves counterattacked with overwhelming numbers. After days of heavy fighting and severe losses, the German offensive stalled. Soon, the Red Army launched its own counteroffensives, pushing the Germans backward. The failure at Kursk marked the last major German attempt to seize the initiative in the east. From that point onward, Soviet forces maintained strategic momentum. Germany's capacity to launch large-scale offensives steadily declined. Kursk confirmed what Stalingrad had begun. The Eastern Front had turned irreversibly against Germany. While Germany struggled in the east, another front intensified in the skies above Europe. In 1943, Allied strategic bombing campaigns expanded dramatically. British bombers struck cities by night, while American aircraft attacked industrial targets by day. Factories, rail yards, oil facilities, and entire urban districts became targets. Cities like Hamburg were devastated by firestorms that killed tens of thousands and left vast areas in ruins. The goal was clear: destroy Germany's industrial capacity and break civilian morale. For the first time, German civilians experienced the full force of modern industrial warfare. Air raid sirens became part of daily life. Families sheltered in basements as bombs fell from the sky. Production was disrupted, housing destroyed, and transportation networks crippled. Although German industry continued operating under immense pressure, the strain grew heavier with each passing month. The bombing campaign forced Germany to divert valuable aircraft and anti-aircraft guns away from the front lines. Resources that could have supported soldiers in Russia were now defending cities at home. The war was no longer distant for the German population. It was immediate and terrifying. The defensive struggle had expanded beyond battlefields into the heart of the Reich itself. In May 1943, Germany and Italy suffered another major defeat, this time in North Africa. After months of intense fighting, Axis forces were trapped in Tunisia by advancing Allied armies. Surrounded and cut off from reinforcement, over 250,000 Axis troops surrendered. It was a loss comparable in scale to Stalingrad. The defeat ended Axis ambitions in Africa and opened the Mediterranean to Allied control. Soon, Allied forces invaded Sicily, bringing the war directly to Italy. The fall of Mussolini's regime followed shortly afterward, shaking Germany's most important European alliance. Italy's collapse forced Germany to occupy much of the country, stretching its military resources even thinner. What had once been a theater of bold Axis maneuver warfare was now another defensive front. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts: Eastern Europe, Italy, the Atlantic, and the skies above its cities. The strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly. Instead of launching coordinated offensives, German commanders scrambled to stabilize collapsing fronts. By late 1943, the Red Army had fully seized the initiative. Soviet offensives rolled westward across Ukraine and beyond. Cities captured by Germany in 1941 and 1942 were retaken one by one. The scale of Soviet operations grew larger and more coordinated, combining armor, infantry, artillery, and air power with increasing effectiveness. German forces, exhausted and under-equipped, were forced into constant retreat. Defensive lines were hastily constructed, only to be broken again. Every withdrawal meant abandoning territory, supplies, and wounded soldiers. The once proud Wehrmacht now fought largely to delay the inevitable. The psychological impact was immense. Soldiers who had once marched confidently into Soviet territory now faced relentless pressure. The belief in ultimate victory faded. Survival and holding ground replaced dreams of conquest. The Eastern Front, which had once symbolized German expansion, now represented slow and painful decline. As losses mounted, Germany faced a severe manpower crisis. Millions of soldiers had already been killed, wounded, or captured. Replacements grew younger and less experienced. Teenage boys and older men were increasingly called into service. Training periods were shortened. To sustain production, the regime relied heavily on forced labor from occupied territories. Millions of foreign workers were brought into Germany under harsh conditions. While this temporarily boosted industrial output, it reflected the desperation of the situation. Germany's economy was being pushed beyond its limits. The quality of German divisions began to decline. Equipment shortages became common. Fuel scarcity restricted movement. The once highly mobile and efficient army was losing its edge. Total war demanded total sacrifice, and the cost was becoming painfully visible. As Germany's fortunes declined, cracks began to appear within the regime itself. Some military officers questioned Hitler's leadership and strategic decisions. Although open opposition was dangerous, dissatisfaction quietly grew among parts of the officer corps. Within occupied Europe, resistance movements expanded. Partisans in Eastern Europe disrupted supply lines. Underground networks in France and elsewhere gathered intelligence and sabotaged German operations. The sense of German dominance was fading. Even among civilians, quiet doubt replaced early war enthusiasm. Endless casualty lists and nightly bombing raids eroded confidence. While propaganda continued promising eventual victory, reality told a different story. The regime maintained strict control, but beneath the surface, uncertainty spread. By the end of 1943, Germany was fully engaged in a war of attrition it could not sustain. The Allies possessed superior industrial capacity, greater manpower reserves, and growing coordination between fronts. Every month, Germany lost more aircraft, tanks, and trained soldiers than it could replace. The strategic picture was clear. The Soviet Union pressed from the east, the Western Allies prepared for larger operations, and bombing raids intensified. Germany fought fiercely, but the initiative belonged entirely to its enemies. The war was no longer about expansion or dominance. It was about delaying defeat. Each battle fought was defensive in nature, each success temporary. The momentum of 1939 and 1940 was gone forever. As 1943 ended, Germany stood at a crossroads, but the options were limited. The promise of quick victory had vanished. The war now demanded endless sacrifice with diminishing returns. Hitler remained determined, refusing to consider negotiation or strategic withdrawal. The declaration of total war had mobilized the nation completely, but it could not reverse the fundamental imbalance of power. Germany faced stronger enemies on every side. The defensive struggle would only intensify in the coming year. The events of 1943 did not mark Germany's immediate collapse, but they sealed its strategic fate. From this point forward, the Third Reich would fight desperately, but always from a position of weakness. Total war had begun, not as a path to victory, but as the final stage of a long and destructive decline.